They say silence is golden. But in my line of work, silence costs millions. When the servers went dark at 9 a.m., my managers panicked. They thought it was a hack. I looked at the code and realized it wasn't an attack. It was a resignation letter, written in the only language I truly understood. The silence was the loudest thing I'd heard in years. In a data analytics firm, you get used to a specific kind of background noise. The low electric hum of cooling fans. The rhythmic clatter of keyboards. The distinct, nervous energy of 100 people turning raw numbers into fortune. It's the heartbeat of the company. At 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, that heartbeat stopped. It wasn't an explosion. It was a suffocation. One by one, the massive monitors on the trading floor flickered and went black. The scrolling feeds of data froze, then dissolved into static. Within 30 seconds, the hum of the server room, a sound I had slept soundly to for a decade, died down to a heavy, terrifying quiet. I was in my office on the top floor, pouring a scotch I didn't intend to drink, when Marcus, my VP of operations, burst in. He was sweating. Marcus was a man who thrived on yelling at subordinates, but he looked small now. "We're under attack," he stammered, his face pale. "Ransomware. Everything is locked. The dashboards, the client portals, the predictive models. It's all gone, Julian." I didn't yell. I rarely yell. I simply set the glass down and walked past him, down the spiral staircase to the main floor. The panic there was palpable. People were shouting into phones, staring helplessly at blank screens. But I didn't look at the people. I looked at the main terminal. A single dialog box was pulsing in the center of the dark void. It wasn't a skull and crossbones. It wasn't a demand for Bitcoin. It was a standard legal notification, glowing in polite, soft red text. License revoked. Authorization key missing. System hibernation initiated. Who holds the key? I asked, my voice cutting through the noise. Marcus shifted his weight. It's legacy code. The architecture was built by that junior analyst. The one who left yesterday. Elena. The name floated to the surface of my mind. I didn't know her well. I knew her work, brilliant, elegant, structured like poetry. But I had let Marcus handle the personnel. That was my first mistake. I walked over to her desk. It was situated in the corner, away from the noise, a small island of calm in the chaos. It was empty, of course. She was gone. But the ghost of her was still there. Her chair was pushed in neatly, unlike the others. There was a ceramic mug with a chip in the rim sitting on a coaster, and a faint lingering scent in the air. Vanilla? No. Vanilla and old paper. A warm library smell that felt completely out of place in this cold steel building. I ran my hand along the edge of her desk. I felt a strange tightness in my chest. Not anger. Not fear. Curiosity. I pulled out my tablet and bypassed Marcus's security protocols, accessing the payroll logs directly. I wanted to know why a woman capable of building an empire-level algorithm would burn it down on a Tuesday morning. I saw the entry immediately. Annual performance bonus, $0. And right below it, a reallocation of funds to the executive retention pool. Marcus's bonus. He had stolen her money. He thought she was just a kid who would take the hit and cry in the bathroom. He didn't realize he was stealing from the architect who held the keys to the kingdom. I looked back at the red text blinking on the main screen. System hibernation. She hadn't destroyed us. She had simply put us to sleep until we learned some manners. I felt the corner of my mouth twitch upward. A smile. I hadn't smiled at a business problem in 5 years. "Marcus," I said, without turning around, my fingers still lingering on her desk. "Don't call the lawyers. And don't call the police." I picked up the chipped mug, turning it over in my large hand. It felt delicate. Important. "I'll handle this myself." Finding her wasn't difficult. Genius leaves a footprint, but it's usually one only a few people know how to track. Elena hadn't hidden herself in a bunker. She was sitting in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office, right in the center of the financial district. It was raining, a gray, relentless drizzle that slicked the city streets and made the windows of the cafe steam up from the inside. When I pushed the door open, a bell chimed, bright and jarring. The air inside was thick, smelling of roasted beans and damp wool. I felt immediately out of place. My Italian wool suit, tailored to within an inch of its life, Felt like armor in a room full of oversized hoodies and knit beanies. I saw her in the back corner. She was typed furiously on a sticker-covered laptop, wearing headphones big enough to drown out a jet engine. She looked young. Younger than I remembered. There was a softness to her features that the harsh fluorescent lights of the office had washed out. But the way her shoulders were set, tense, high-ready, told me she wasn't soft. She was waiting for the impact. I approached the table slowly. I didn't want to startle her. When I tapped my knuckles on the wooden tabletop, she didn't jump. She stopped typing. She took a breath. I saw her chest rise and fall, a deliberate attempt to steady herself, and then she slid the headphones down around her neck. She looked up. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and absolutely defiant. "If you're here to serve me with a lawsuit," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "you can leave it on the table. My lawyer is already drafting a countersuit for wage theft." I didn't say a word. I just pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down. The wood creaked under my weight. "I'm not here to sue you, Elena," I said. My voice was low, a quiet rumble beneath the clatter of the barista machine behind us. She narrowed her eyes. "Then why are you here?" "The police." "No." I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. She flinched just a fraction of an inch. She expected a subpoena. Instead, I pulled out a folded check. I placed it on the table and slid it across the scarred wood, pushing it through the invisible barrier between us until it rested next to her cold coffee. She looked at it. Then she looked at me. "What is this?" she whispered. "That is your bonus," I said. "Plus 20%. Call it an inconvenience fee." Her hand hovered over the paper, her fingers trembling slightly. It wasn't greed. It was relief. She picked it up, reading the numbers, and the defiance in her face cracked, revealing the exhaustion underneath. "Marcus told me the company couldn't afford it," she said, looking back at me. "He said numbers were down." "Marcus was mistaken," I replied, keeping my gaze locked on hers. "And Marcus is currently clearing out his desk." The silence that stretched between us then changed. It wasn't the hostile silence of enemies. It was the heavy, charged silence of two people suddenly seeing each other clearly for the first time. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the ink smudge on her pinky finger. I saw the way a stray curl of dark hair fell over her eye, and the urge to reach across the table and tuck it back was so sudden, so visceral, it nearly knocked the wind out of me. "The money is yours," I said, leaning in slightly. The scent of rain and vanilla was stronger here. "But I have a problem, Elena. I have a company that's asleep. And you're the only one who knows the lullaby to wake it up." She bit her lip. It was a nervous habit. It drew my attention to her mouth, and I had to force myself to look back up to her eyes. "You want me to come back?" she asked. "No," I said. "I want to hire you as an external consultant. Triple your previous rate. Your own hours. No Marcus. Just you. And me." She hesitated. The steam from her cup curled between us, blurring the air. "Just you and me?" she repeated, testing the weight of the words. "Just us," I confirmed. And for the first time, the ghost of a smile touched her lips. "The office changes after midnight. During the day, it's a machine of glass and steel, cold and efficient. But at 2 a.m., when the cleaners have gone and the city outside is nothing but a grid of distant amber lights, the space becomes intimate. For 3 nights in a row, it was just the two of us. Elena had agreed to the contract, but she worked on her own timeline. She didn't come in until the sun went down. She said she coded better when the world was quiet. And I, a man who usually valued his sleep, found myself staying. Ostensibly, I was there to authorize overrides and sign off on system patches. In reality, I was there because I couldn't tear myself away. I sat at the head of the conference table. She was perched at the other end, surrounded by a fortress of monitors. The overhead fluorescents were off. The only light came from the warm, golden glow of the desk lamps and the blue wash of the code scrolling across her screens. It was quiet, save for the rhythmic, rapid-fire sound of her typing. It was a hypnotic sound. Click, 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 pause. Click, click, click. Like rainfall. I had discarded my jacket hours ago. My tie was loosened, hanging undone around my collar. A state of undress no employee had ever seen me in. I watched her over the rim of my coffee cup. She was focused, her brow furrowed in that intense, beautiful way that signaled she was solving a problem I couldn't even comprehend. "You're staring," she said, without looking away from the screen. I chuckled, a low sound in the empty room. "I'm supervising." "You're bored," she corrected, finally glancing up. Her eyes were tired but bright. "And you're hovering. It's making the servers nervous." "I ordered food," I said, deflecting. "Ty, it should be here in 10 minutes." She stretched, arching her back, her arms reaching up. Her hoodie rode up slightly, just an inch, revealing the waist of her jeans. I looked away, shifting in my chair, suddenly acutely aware of the temperature in the room. It felt warmer than it should have been. "Come here," she said softly. "Look at this." I stood up and walked the length of the long mahogany table to stand behind her chair. I placed one hand on the back of her seat, leaning over her shoulder to look at the monitor. She smelled of that same vanilla scent, mixed now with the faint, sharp tang of ozone from the electronics. Being this close to her felt dangerous, not in a professional sense, but in a way that rattled the composure I had spent 20 years building. "I found the backdoor Marcus left open," she pointed to a line of code. I leaned closer, squinting at the text. "Can you patch it?" "Already did." She reached for the mouse at the same moment I reached to point at the screen. Our hands collided. It wasn't a grab. It was a brush. The side of my thumb against the soft skin of her hand. But the reaction was instant. We both froze. The typing stopped. The humming of the hard drive seemed to vanish. For 3 seconds, neither of us moved. I could feel the heat radiating from her skin. I could hear the shallow intake of her breath. My hand was still touching hers, covering it, dwarfing it. I should have pulled away. I was her boss's boss. I was 46 years old. I was the man paying her check. But I didn't move. And neither did she. She slowly turned her head, looking up at me over her shoulder. Her face was inches from mine. Her lips were slightly parted. The defiance was gone, replaced by a question I wasn't brave enough to answer. "Julian," she whispered. "Not Mr. Vance. Julian." The elevator dinged in the hallway, announcing the delivery driver. The spell broke. I straightened up, stepping back, putting a safe, cold distance between us. "Good work," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. I'll go get the food." I walked out of the room without looking back, but I could still feel the ghost of her skin against mine. Shadows don't just exist at night. In a corporate office, they thrive under the brightest fluorescent lights. By the second week, the servers were humming again. The crisis was technically over. But a new kind of tension had begun to bleed into the air conditioning. I noticed it first in the break room. When I walked in to get coffee, the conversation didn't just stop. It died. 3 junior analysts were huddled by the window, laughing. As soon as they saw me, they scattered like roaches when the lights flip on. I'm a pragmatist. I know what people see when they look at us. They see a man of 46, the owner of the firm, spending every waking hour with a 25-year-old consultant. They see her walking into my office without knocking. They see the lunches we order. They don't see the code reviews. They don't see the arguments over data architecture. They see a cliché. Sugar daddy. The favorite. The pet. I heard the words float out of a cubicle row as we walked toward the conference room for the weekly status update. Elena froze. Just for a second. Her back went rigid. She was wearing a blazer today, sharp, professional, trying so hard to be taken seriously. But in that moment she looked incredibly small. She gripped her tablet so hard her knuckles turned white. She kept walking, head high, pretending she hadn't heard. But I had. And a cold, dark anger started to uncoil in my chest. We entered the conference room. 12 department heads were waiting. The air was stale. Greg, the new VP of sales, leaned back in his chair. He was younger than me, arrogant, the kind of man who measures worth by the cost of his watch. "So," Greg said, spinning a pen between his fingers, "is the consultant sticking around much longer? That hourly rate is eating into my Q3 budget. Seems like a lot of money for tech support." He smirked. A few others chuckled. The implication hung heavy in the room. What is she really getting paid for? Elena opened her mouth to speak, her voice tight, but I cut her off. Not with a shout, but with a silence. I slowly closed the folder in front of me. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I didn't look at Greg. I looked at the table. Then I stood up. I walked behind Elena's chair. I didn't touch her, not at first. I just stood there, a solid wall of presence behind her back. The consultant, I said, my voice dropping an octave, perfectly calm and terrifyingly low, rebuilt the entire predictive engine in 4 days. A task your entire department failed to do in 4 years. I placed my hand on the back of her chair. It was a subtle gesture. Possessive. Protective. A signal to every wolf in the room that she was not prey. She isn't tech support, Greg. She is the architect of your paycheck. If she leaves, the system goes with her. And if she goes... I finally looked him in the eye, holding his gaze until he looked away. I go. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the projector. I looked down at Elena. She was looking up at me, her eyes wide, glassy with a mixture of shock and something else. Gratitude? No. Admiration. My hand lingered on her chair a second too long. My thumb brushed the fabric of her blazer, just near her shoulder. I felt her lean back just a fraction of an inch into my touch. Continue the presentation, Elena, I said softly. And when she spoke, her voice didn't shake. It soared. The final invoice landed on my desk at 5 p.m. on a Friday. It was a standard PDF, attached to an email with no subject line. It detailed the hours logged, the patches installed, and the successful restoration of the analytics core. At the bottom, in bold, black letters, contract status, fulfilled. It should have been a moment of victory. My company was safe. The bleeding had stopped. But staring at those words, I didn't feel relief. I felt a hollow sinking sensation in the pit of my stomach, like I was watching a ship sail away while I was stranded on the dock. I walked her to her car. It was a courtesy I insisted on, though she told me she was perfectly capable of using an elevator. The ride down to the parking garage took 45 seconds. I know because I counted every heartbeat. We stood side by side, watching the floor numbers drop. The mirrored walls of the elevator reflected us back. Me in my dark charcoal suit, her in jeans and that same blazer she'd worn all week. We looked like two people from different worlds who had briefly collided, only to be pulled apart by gravity. The doors slid open with a cheerful chime that felt mocking. The parking garage was cold. It was a subterranean world of concrete echoes and fluorescent hums. The air smelled of gasoline and damp earth. Elena hugged her arms around herself. It was late autumn, and the basement draft was biting. Without thinking, instinct overriding protocol, I slipped off my overcoat. "You're freezing," I said. Before she could protest, I draped the heavy wool coat over her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame. The sleeves hung past her hands. The hem reached her knees. She looked up at me, startled, pulling the lapels tight against her neck. She looked right. She looked like she belonged in my protection. We reached her car, a battered sedan parked in the far corner. She unlocked it, the lights flashing orange in the dimness. She opened the door, but she didn't get in. She just stood there, one hand on the roof of the car, looking at the ground. "So," she said, her voice echoing slightly against the concrete. "I guess the system is stable." "It is," I agreed. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. "You did incredible work, Elena. You saved us." "And the contract is up," she added. She looked up then. Her eyes were searching mine, looking for a sign, a reason to stall. "I guess I don't have a reason to come in on Monday." This was the moment. The responsible thing to do was to shake her hand, wish her luck, and let her go find a young man who listened to the same music and didn't have gray at his temples. That was what a good mentor would do. But I wasn't feeling like a mentor. I stepped closer. Just one step. Enough to invade her personal space. Enough to smell the vanilla perfume clinging to her neck, mixing with the cedar of my coat. "The contract is up," I repeated. I watched her throat move as she swallowed. "Professionally speaking, there is no reason for you to return." She nodded, a jerky, sad motion. She started to turn toward the driver's seat. "Right. Well, goodbye, Julian." "Wait." The word was out before I could stop it. My hand moved on its own, catching the open door of her car, preventing her from leaving. She froze, looking back at me. Her breath hitched. I looked down at her, fighting the war between propriety and desire. Desire was winning. I don't care about the professional reasons, I said, my voice dropping to a rough whisper. I don't want the contract to end, Elena. In fact, I'm looking for a loophole to keep you here. A loophole, she breathed. Yes, I said, leaning down so our eyes were level. But I think it requires rewriting the terms of service. Entirely. We didn't say goodbye in the garage. Instead, we took the elevator back up. Not to the office floor, but to the roof terrace, a strip of concrete and wind high above the city. It was midnight now. The rain had stopped, leaving the air scrubbed clean and sharp. Below us, the city was a sprawling grid of amber and white light, looking exactly like the circuit boards Elena spent her life repairing. She was standing at the railing looking out. She was still wearing my coat. It was comical how big it was on her. Yet seeing her wrapped in my wool and scent did something terrible to my resolve. It made me want to keep her there. I walked up beside her. The wind whipped her dark hair across her face, chaotic and wild. You're quiet, I said. The wind stole the words, so I had to step closer. You're never quiet, Elena. She didn't look at the city. She turned to look at me. The moonlight was unforgiving. It showed the fear in her eyes, but also the fierce, terrifying hope. I'm waiting, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You said we needed new terms. I'm waiting to hear them. I sighed, a long exhale that rattled in my chest. I rested my hands on the cold metal railing, looking down at the drop. The terms are simple, I said, not looking at her. I can't be your boss anymore. I can't be your client. I can't be the man who signs your checks. Because of the optics? She asked. No, I turned to face her fully. Because I can't be objective about you. I look at you and I don't see an analyst. I don't see a prodigy. I reached out then. My hand felt heavy, but I couldn't stop it. I reached up and caught a strand of hair that the wind had blown across her cheek. I tucked it slowly behind her ear. My fingers lingered there, grazing the soft skin of her jawline. Her skin was cold from the air. My hand was warm. She leaned into the touch, closing her eyes, a soft sound escaping her throat. What do you see? She whispered, eyes still closed. I see the only thing that makes sense in this entire building, I murmured. My thumb brushed her cheekbone. I see the woman who woke me up. She opened her eyes. They were dark, swimming with emotion. I'm not afraid of the age gap, Julian. I'm not afraid of what people say. I am, I admitted. It was the hardest thing I'd ever said aloud. I'm 46, Elena. I have baggage. I have a past. I have gray in my beard and I go to bed at 10 o'clock. I like the gray, she said, a small, brave smile touching her lips. She reached up, her small, cold hand covering mine where it rested on her face. And I hate staying up late. The laughter that bubbled up in me was relief. Pure, unadulterated relief. I stepped in, closing the final inch of distance between us. I wrapped my arms around her, around the coat that was already mine, and pulled her against me. It wasn't a polite hug. It was a collision. She buried her face in the crook of my neck, her hands clutching the lapels of my suit jacket. I buried my face in her hair, inhaling the vanilla and the rain, shutting my eyes tight against the vertigo of how much I wanted this. We stood there for a long time, the wind howling around us, two static points in a spinning world. I could feel her heart beating against my chest, frantic and fast, matching my own. You know, I whispered into her hair, my voice rough. You didn't just trigger the kill switch on the servers, Elena. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her face inches from mine. No. No, I said, running my hand down the back of her head, holding her steady. You dismantled my defenses. Completely. Sunday mornings used to be silent in the wrong way. Before Elena, my Sundays were just empty spaces between work weeks. A large, quiet house in the suburbs, echoing with the sound of a clock ticking in the hallway. I would usually drive into the office by noon just to hear the hum of the servers, to feel like part of a machine that was actually moving. But this Sunday, the silence is different. It's full. I stood in the kitchen, watching the morning sun spill across the marble island. It wasn't the harsh blue light of a computer monitor. It was warm, yellow, and unforgivingly bright. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. A messiness I would have hated a year ago, but now found strangely comforting. I poured 2 cups of coffee. Black for me. plenty of oat milk and 2 sugars for her. I heard her before I saw her. The soft pad of bare feet on the hardwood floor. Elena walked in, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She wasn't wearing the sharp blazers or the defensive armor she wore at the office. She was wearing one of my old university t-shirts that hung to her knees, her dark hair piled into a chaotic knot on top of her head. She didn't say good morning. She just walked up to me, wrapped her arms around my waist, and rested her forehead against my chest. "Is that coffee?" she mumbled into the fabric of my shirt. "It is," I replied, resting my chin on top of her head. "Freshly ground." She pulled back, taking the mug from my hand. Her fingers brushed mine. A touch that was no longer electric with tension, but warm with familiarity. She hopped up onto the counter, sitting there with her legs dangling, looking at me over the rim of the cup. There was something sitting next to her on the marble. A small brass object. A key. Not a digital license key. Not an encryption code. A physical key to my front door. I had given it to her the night before. "You know," she said, nodding toward the key, "this is a security risk. Giving a hacker full access to your primary residence." I chuckled, leaning forward to brace my hands on the counter on either side of her hips, trapping her in a cage of my own arms. "I've seen your security protocols, Elena," I said softly. "I think my assets are safer with you than they are with me." We moved to the living room after that. It's become our ritual. I sat on the deep leather sofa, reading the physical Sunday paper, a habit she calls archaic. She sat next to me, her legs thrown casually over my lap, scrolling through tech news on her tablet. My hand rested absent-mindedly on her ankle, my thumb tracing the line of her bone. It was a grounding touch. Every few minutes she would show me something on her screen. A new algorithm, a piece of news, a meme I didn't understand, and I would lower my paper and listen. I looked at her profile as the sunlight caught her eyelashes. I thought about the chaos of that Tuesday morning. I thought about the red text on the black screen. License revoked. Marcus stealing her bonus was the worst business decision ever made in my company's history. But for me, it was the greatest stroke of luck I'd ever had. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, catching me staring. She lowered her tablet, a small smile playing on her lips. I folded the newspaper and set it aside. I squeezed her hand gently. "I was just thinking," I said, my voice low and content. "The analytics are back online. Profits are up. The system is running perfectly." I leaned in, kissing her forehead. "But the most important data point is right here." She laughed, a bright sound that filled the room. "You're cheesy in the mornings, Julian." "I'm happy, Elena," I corrected. "There's a difference. Sometimes the biggest risks yield the highest returns. And sometimes the crash is just the beginning of something beautiful." If you felt the chemistry between Julian and Elena today, please press that like button gently. It tells YouTube that romance is still alive. And I have a question for you in the comments. Do you believe that intelligence is the most attractive trait a partner can have? Or is it the way they make you feel safe? I read every single thought you share. Make sure you are subscribed with the bell turned on. I have another story waiting for you, and trust me, you won't want to miss the spark. Until next time.